Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art. My name is Simon Elliott. I'm the Deputy Director here, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to yet another wonderful evening with the Perspective Asia program. Look, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country upon which we meet, Jagera and Turrbal people, pay my respects to their elders past and present and indeed emerging. And I think you only need to look around our gallery to see what a fantastic contribution Indigenous Australians make to the art and culture of Australia. I'd also like to extend that welcome to any First Nations people that are with us this evening. I know there's the Pacific Arts Association has been held here just recently, and I think there's some people that have come along and to this as well, which you're most welcome. And while I'm on acknowledgements, and is the microphone on? Yes, it is. I'd also like to acknowledge our very close friend, Professor Caitlin Byrne, who of course is the director of the Griffith Asia Institute, Griffith University, who's a great partner in relation to the Perspective Asia series. Tonight we are joined by two very special guests. Barbara Masike-Liri is the PNG Country Director at the Nature Conservancy and she is based in Port Moresby, and Robyn James, Director of the Conservation for Melanesia at the Nature Conservancy based in Brisbane. Tonight's discussion is part of an ongoing and enduring Perspective Asia partnership between QAGOMA, Australia's Centre for the Asia Pacific Art, and Griffith University's Griffith Art Institute. Papua New Guinea has a special place in Australian consciousness, as we all know. They are a close neighbour and a historical ally, and Australia has recently acknowledged the need to strengthen this political relationship. QAGOMA has been engaged in the arts and art of the Pacific since the first Asia-Pacific Triennial back in 1993, and many of these artists have found their way into our exhibitions and our collection over that time. APT9, which of course is on until the 26th of April, so what's that, 2 or 3 weeks away that it closes, is a great example of the gallery's engagement with Papua New Guinea and the Pacific, and more broadly through specially commissioned projects from Bougainville, the Solomon Islands, East New Britain, and of course the Marshall Islands. Tonight's special guests will focus on one aspect of the Pacific that is currently under threat, the mangrove. Barbara is a Bougainvillean woman who began her career as a journalist. She's been working with the Nature Conservancy for the last 15 years, supporting community conservation in Papua New Guinea. Barbara will enlighten us with the knowledge of how women and communities use mangroves for their livelihood and the larger scale economic benefits they have derived from mangrove preservation and related concerns such as the blue carbon economy. Robyn James is familiar to many of you for her work with Nature Conservancy in Melanesia since 2010. She also leads women's empowerment work across the organisation. Robyn will share her knowledge of the issues arising from the shifts in the natural environment in Melanesia and the current status of mangroves in Papua New Guinea. The Nature Conservancy is internationally an international NGO working with women across PNG to address mangrove loss and women's empowerment through the Mangoro Market Meri project. Women are playing a key role in the fight against the large-scale land and coastal clearing that threatens their local ecology and ecosystems, and indeed their livelihoods. Would you please make welcome Robyn and Barbara?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good evening. And we'd like to thank Simon for the introduction and also acknowledge everyone here, the traditional owners, past, present and emerging, and First Nations people too. And we'd also like to very much thank Griffith University and the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art for hosting this tonight. We've been working quite closely with the beautiful Caitlin and Zara and Ruth over quite a long time now, and it's just an emerging partnership that we're really excited about, women supporting women, so thank you. I will get this little clicker. and we're going to be talking today about women guardians of the mangroves. It's a topic that's very dear in both our hearts, Barbara especially. And these 4 people in this photo here are 4 of the women that work with us very closely on this project that we're going to talk to you about tonight. And the joy in their faces is about us developing this project that's about women for women. Just before we go into too much, I'll just give you a little bit of background about our organisation. Both of us, Barbara's been with the Nature Conservancy for 15 years now, and I've been there since 2010, so we're both kind of long-termers here. The Nature Conservancy is the largest environmental NGO in the world. It's got over 4,000 staff and around 600 scientists. We work on 4 major themes, so climate change, protecting land and water, and building healthy cities. And we're really kind of about sustainable livelihoods, so food and water, so helping people access clean water and food on the table. And that's where our work in Papua New Guinea really comes to the fore. These are the countries in this region of the world that we work in, and tonight we're going to be particularly focusing on our work in Papua New Guinea. As Simon introduced, Barbara is a proud Bougainvillean woman and based in Port Moresby, and I'm based here in Brisbane, but really working in Solomons and Papua New Guinea. And so I'm going to hand over to Barbara now to give you a little bit of context about PNG, about some of the issues, and then we'll talk to you about our project.
Thank you, Robyn. So just a little bit of context about Papua New Guinea. The Pacific has about 10 million people, and in about 8 million of those people in the Pacific are found in Papua New Guinea. And with very diverse cultures, we have more than 800 plus languages. In Papua New Guinea, 90% of our people still live in rural areas where there are no services such as education or health. Our economy is really based on the extraction of our natural resources. And although we have so much in terms of biodiversity, we still face a lot of poverty in the rural areas.
And Barbara and I, particularly, like, our passion and our interest is helping women be more involved in conservation. So as she and I have kind of worked over the years on community conservation in Papua New Guinea and other countries, and also trying to help link communities up to government policy, we've really noticed that women are often left out of the conversation. And in Papua New Guinea, there's particular issues around equality that mean that women find it harder to engage in our work, but also in general. So there's currently no, or there never has been, or there's been one parliamentarian in PNG who's a woman. And that second statistic, I won't read it out loud, but that's confronting, and that is something that impacts our staff, it impacts our work, it impacts the communities we work in. So for us, it's a really real issue, and we're working as an organisation and as a team to think, how can we help women in the face of these sort of statistics and this sort of data be the best they can be at work, in our organisation, in leadership roles and in the community. But it's really hard because 18% of girls are enrolled in secondary school. So if you work in a science-based organisation like that, all of a sudden it's really hard for us to even employ women to be in our organisation. So there's all these little things that you don't think of until you're working day to day, that you think, well, how do we help women be in our organisation? How do we help women be leaders in their community when they're facing kind of real challenges on a daily basis? It's really hard for kids to get the nutrition and the protein that they need to be the best that they can be, and that impacts how they go at school, whether they're tired, whether they're engaged in school, and so that in turn leads up to impacting our work as well. So in that context of PNG, Barbara's talked to you about the overall context. And the other thing that I'd just like to stress before we go into why we work in PNG is that it's an amazing place. Like, for those who haven't been there before, it's incredibly biodiverse. There's 800 languages. Like, that is amazing. And 200,000 species, 250 different types of mammals. It's just an incredible place. And so our organisation feels really privileged to work there. And David Attenborough, I remember watching a documentary with him, and he talked about seeing the bird of paradise in Papua New Guinea, and he said it was his best wildlife experience ever. And he's seen everything. So it's an incredible place.
So the Nature Conservancy has been working in Papua New Guinea for a little over 20 years. Our work is really focused on the fourth national goal of our constitution, which is about conserving our natural resources for the collective benefit of all. So we work at the community level with various groups, community-based organizations, civil society, governments at all levels, local, provincial, and national, trying to look at what sort of laws and policies are needed to be able to support conservation at the community level, and trying to look at ways on how we can be able to influence policy development that supports natural resource management. In the 15 years that I have been at the Nature Conservancy, often we go to the communities to run workshops and trainings, and many of the participants, they are men. And so we ask, where are the women? And they say, oh, the women are in the mangroves looking for our dinner. So this is the kind of situation that we are faced with. And we want to be able to empower women. We want to bring them to the table to talk conservation, because they are the users of the resources that we must be able to manage so that we can be able to have resources for our future generations.
Yeah, so Barbara, I mean, when I first started at the Nature Conservancy, Barbara wasn't the country director, but I remember meeting her and she telling me about there's no women at the table in our meetings. And so we've been grappling with this idea, with this sort of problem, because when it's self-selecting, it's very difficult for women to sort of be at the table. And so a few years ago, Barbara, me, and a bunch of women got together, and we decided to develop a strategy for how we were going to engage with women in our program. And we developed the gender strategy for our program, and it addresses women at the staffing level. How can we help women feel safe at work, getting to work, getting paid equally? How can we redesign our job descriptions so that women feel able to apply for them? And it's just simple things like, for example, you don't need to have a boat license to apply for a job with us anymore, and typically that excluded women. And then we looked at the community level, and we looked at some of the issues that women were facing to be engaged with us. And then Barbara's passion is mangroves.
So I was born on a tiny island just near Bougainville called Sohano. And my mother is not from the coastal area. My mother comes from another province in Papua New Guinea, from the Sepik. She's a river woman. But when my father married her, he took her to Bougainville. And there, she adapted to the environment and started to fish in the mangroves. As the youngest in a family of 5 girls, I often found myself sleeping in the canoe when my mother was fishing. So my mother had to support, my father's income, and so to put food on the table for us, to make sure that we had enough to eat. So mangroves are really important. And we have done surveys to even find out that mangroves support livelihoods. Mangroves are areas where fish breed. Mangroves protect the coastline from erosion. Mangroves provide building materials for houses. Mangroves, now we know that mangroves hold carbon. So, we are getting into these ideas about how great mosquito-infested mangroves are. Yeah, but, it's the women who go into the mangroves to find food for the table. So we've been really looking at how we can mobilize women, how we can be able to help them, empower them to be able to manage, conserve mangroves, but be able to support their families in the long run.
So as you can notice by Barbara's voice that she really, really loves mangroves, and it's contagious. So I didn't used to love mangroves as much as I do now, but the other thing, I wanted to put this photo up because it's a beautiful photo, but also people often don't realise how important mangroves are for all of us. So most commercial fisheries, at least the fish rely at some stage in their life cycle on healthy mangrove systems. So commercial fisheries, but also subsistence fisheries in Papua New Guinea. And often a lot of people don't realise how important mangroves are. Our organisation's done some valuations of the economic value of mangroves for protecting coastline, for fisheries, and for climate change impacts, and they are valued between $200 and $1 million US per hectare, so depending on where you are. So that's significant when they're being cleared at some of the highest rates of any forest in the world. So for us, it's sort of like, well, what can we do? PNG's got some of the most healthy and intact mangrove systems in the world. 90% of people are pretty much reliant on some part of the mangrove system in PNG for their livelihoods. So this is something that we need to engage in. And because, this is a little video I wanted to show you, but because women in particular are so dependent on mangroves, and we were really looking at a way to engage with women, this is how this idea came. But I love this little video, and I just wanted to show you. It's just, 10 seconds or something. But it just shows you how important mangroves are for storm surge and controlling erosion. So if you look at that and then you look behind the mangroves, so they're incredibly important for reducing coastal erosion. And they can also help with climate change because they're sort of develop their own kind of habitat where sediment builds up and builds up and builds up. And so they can help with the impacts of sea level rise. But I love that little video because it really shows you how important they are. And we've sort of talked about women and livelihoods and our lovely Barbara.
So like I was saying earlier, we go to run workshops in the villages and in the provinces, and we ask, where are the women? And they say the women are out in the mangroves. And that's what they actually do. They go put traps in the mangrove areas, they catch their crabs, then they have to tie them up like that and go sell them in the markets so that they can earn an income to send their children to school, to pay for basic goods and services.
So there's a few of you in the audience that were probably here in 2017, just next door. We hosted an event, but Barbara, we brought together 5 groups of women from across the Pacific that wanted to work on a big idea for conservation. So it was part of our gender strategy actually to really help women have their own space where they could be decision makers, they could develop their own ideas and not just be the support people, not just be behind the scenes. So we felt that if they had their own space where it was just women, that they could be who they wanted to be and think of their own ideas. So we had 5 groups from across the Pacific, and Papua New Guinea was one of those groups, and they were developing their big idea around mangroves and women and connecting women to markets, around a bigger idea around connecting their conservation with the economy. And it's kind of Barbara's idea. We were all just trying to make it happen for her. And so we're going to show you the video.
feeling excited, and we see this as a big opportunity. We're looking forward to what's going to come up in the conference.
And my role today was to help the ladies, the lovely ladies from Papua New Guinea, who are trying to put together a business idea that will that they can take back to Papua New Guinea and hopefully get some clear outcomes for themselves in what they're wanting to do, and be an income generating project for them.
Papua New Guinea holds some of the world's most globally significant mangrove forests.
The mangroves are very important to the women in Papua New Guinea.
When it comes to mangroves, women are the ones that really sort of forage in the mangroves for crabs and shellfish and fishing and even firewood. Mangrove is very important for sustainable livelihoods in Papua New Guinea. We also talked about the mangroves goods and services. Things like crabs, mud crabs, shellfish and fish and prawns, things like that. These are the things that goods and services from the mangroves. So how can we know that these resources are there? What sort of economic opportunities are there?
And our vision is we will create economic incentives projects through market development of mangrove products, ecotourism, and blue carbon initiatives in PNG.
I work mostly in the rural setting, and I see that there is a big need in empowering women in the rural communities especially.
Increased participation of women in income generation activities.
I'm excited to hear about what the women will share, their knowledge, their learning. And I think this learning is very important for us to move forward in terms of empowering women to be conservationists, but also that they're empowered to make a difference, because I think the thing that stands out in the women in the region is that they are courageous, they are resilient, and they have their own story to tell.
They're from all over Papua New Guinea, from all the provinces that have mangroves, and they're going to talk to you about their big idea around connecting women, the food on the table now, food in the future, and for long-term financial sustainability.
And many of these women that you see here today, they are doing conservation in the communities. But often, when they come back home, their husbands ask them, what are you bringing to the table? Where's the food? Where's the money? I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that there is no economic incentive for those who are doing mangrove conservation. And so I think that's one thing that we want to really focus on. How do we generate, how do we mobilize communities to generate income whilst doing mangrove conservation? So we want to make a difference. And our big idea this week is to continue to do conservation, but to really connect it to economic benefits.
And the combination of your traditional knowledge with modern science and with new market mechanisms, carbon offsets, it really does create a credible business case, and there are lots of people that will be there to support you.
That's just a little overview of what we did nearly 2 years ago. And so often these things are exciting at the time, but it's like, oh, what happened after that? Did we all just go back to our day jobs? But we're pleased to tell you that lots of things have happened since that lovely event. We've worked really hard to, as a team, form a team of what we really want to do around this Mangrove Market Meri project. we've branded ourselves. So this amazing logo was designed by the woman on the first slide who was looking at you smiling, Ruth Konia. She's our conservation person in Moresby and is really leading a lot of this work. So we branded ourselves. We've sort of developed our business idea. We've worked about, like, who are we trying to service here? Are we just trying to service individual women, or are we trying to service the collective? So we defined our scope. We really don't want to just work with a couple of groups, like we're thinking bigger. We're starting small with 2 provinces, but we're thinking about how we can work together with women across Papua New Guinea. And I'll hand over to Barbara, and these are the things that we've, as a group, have decided that we're going to work on.
So as we have rebranded ourselves, Mangoro Market Meri would really like to link the women who are doing, selling their crabs, but while, many of the women just go and sit at the markets for days and days trying to sell their goods, but we would like to explore if there are markets internationally that these women can sell their crabs to. We also would like to look into how we can connect women in the local communities to do ecotourism initiatives around mangrove areas. We also want to look at this idea around blue carbon, because the mangroves hold a lot of carbon, not just in the trees, but also in the soil. And we are also seeing that there is a need for us to do more awareness on the importance of mangroves.
So, and we realise that we can't do it all alone. We're not experts on a lot of this, so we've really tried to get as much help as possible. We were lucky enough to get some funding from a donor overseas who's really interested in startups. And so he particularly was interested in our idea because we're sort of trying to do something different for women in PNG. And so he's given us some sort of startup money just so we can explore this idea. So what we did was we engaged a climate specialist who has done a lot of the carbon work in Australia, in Northern Australia, around trying to help Indigenous people go back to cool season burning and offset their carbon. And so he helped us develop a business model in terms of thinking about if women were able to have access to clean cook stoves, for example, which are small stoves that use less fuel than an open fire. So most women in PNG, the women do all the cooking and they cook on these open fires and they use a lot of firewood, but there's also a lot of impacts on women's health in terms of carrying huge amounts of firewood, the time it takes every day. And so he helped us design a project that's really around helping women access clean stoves, small stoves, and so they use less firewood. And then if you can engage in a carbon market, you can get a company to buy the carbon that you save. So you burn less carbon into the atmosphere, and then a company such as an airline or whatever can buy the carbon that you don't burn and offset their emissions. So we've been working on that idea. So that's sort of a little infographic of what we do. So we help women to access clean cooking technology. They use less wood. Then we measure how much carbon they save, by burning less wood. So we calculated that if they would on average burn 3 tonnes of carbon a year, if they use a clean cook stove, they only use 1 tonne of carbon a year, so that they can sell 2 tonnes of carbon. So I'm sure you're all lost now, as we were most of the time in all of this. And that's some of the benefits of this Clean Cook Stove project. But, that's a photo of, that's to give you a visual of Manus where we work, and that's the type of wood that we're talking that women are collecting on a daily basis. So there's this, I've just explained in like 30 seconds elevator pitch this project, except when we spoke to the women in our team, none of us really understood what this was all about. So we had a specialist that we'd engaged to help us think through this, but we realised it's not being owned by the women on our team. We don't actually understand. We're sort of agreeing. And then I'd say, okay, well, Barbara, can you explain back to us all what it's about? And Barbara would go, no. And so we'd ask someone else, can you? And I'd be like, no, I can't do it either. So we were like, well, we've got a problem here. This is supposed to be a women's project. If we can't explain it, then we're probably on the wrong track, or something's wrong. We're missing a piece. So we were pretty brave, and we were offered money and stuff, and we actually said, no, we don't know. We want to be really sure what we're doing here, and we want it to be owned. And we've seen lots of projects fail in the past in PNG or in conservation, where people have gone too fast, or it hasn't been led by people on the ground. So we were pretty brave, and we just said, nah, we're going to take a step back here, and we're going to just make sure everyone knows what we're doing and everyone's on board. And so we went back to this, and I'll hand back to Barbara.
So we are going back to the community level to talk to women again about, what is really the need in terms of mangroves. If you want to do mangrove conservation, what are opportunities that you would like to be involved in? So getting back into the communities and talking to the women and men also, and government, in how we can all pull together the expertise so we have a pathway that we can work towards.
And that's the person in the blue is Sunita Wawi. She's on our team as well. And when she originally started working with us on this project, she was like, I just want to do my job and get my money. Robyn, just give me some activities, I'll do it. And then I just spoke to her. She was just out in the communities a couple of weeks ago in a new province working on mangroves. And I said, how did it go, Sunita? And she's just like, I found out all these new uses for mangroves. And she was so excited. She said, Ruth made me present. I've never presented before. And I presented and I got really good feedback. And I said, so you just focused on just doing your job? And she's like, nah, I'm in now, Robyn. And so it was just like really exciting to see some of the women in our team taking on more leadership roles. And this awareness, do you want to talk about that, Barbara?
Yes, so like I said, there is a need for awareness in the local communities. So we've engaged an artist who is really like, doesn't have a job, but he's a really good artist. So we've engaged him, and he's helping us to work on some, developing some awareness materials that we are going to use to generate awareness on the importance of mangroves in the local communities. So we've just started that in Milne Bay.
Yeah, and this guy's homeless, and so Ruth, when she just went and described the pictures that she wanted. So we all worked on what we needed, and then he is often under a bridge in this certain part of Port Moresby, and Ruth will go and find him and describe what she wants, and these are the pictures that he draws. So it's a pretty amazing story, and we're trying to be really inclusive in this project. So. Just trying to engage a whole bunch of different people that may or may not have access to sort of opportunities. And yeah, I guess this is my passion, is Barbara's is mangroves and women, and mine is strong women groups. So really working with some of our local groups to help them be whatever they want to be. So working with them to create a vision, working with them to create really strong governance, and then working with them to access the economy. Because at the end of the day, all of us need money. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. We can't just do conservation for fun. Like women need money. They need money to pay their school fees. They need money. So we're trying to really think about ways in which women can access the economy but still protect their resources. And that Clean Cookstove project I talked to you about, this group is from Manus, and they were the ones that really wanted to implement this Clean Cookstove project. And Piwin, the head of this organisation, she was in that video, but she is just a powerhouse. She's one of the most inspiring people I know. But she just wants to get going and do it. And we were like, yeah, but P1, you don't have a board, we don't have a bank account. We need to do all these things first or we're going to fail, and then will be another project that failed. So we're really taking a step back and working with them to develop the board, a really strong board, really strong financial management arrangements, really strong governance. And it's all starting to come together, and it's really exciting, and they're a great group. And then we've got new partners, which Barbara will talk about.
So we've been working in Manus province, and now we want to work in Milne Bay province. And we have this young woman here. She is a local tour guide operator, and she takes tourists out to the resorts in the mangrove areas. So we are going to be working with her. Our team was recently there helping them to create the awareness material. So what we are planning to do is the idea around voluntourism, where you use tourists to go out and give back something to the communities. So that's the kind of arrangement that we are working with Ville Links in Milne Bay province.
And that is a women, like Maletta owns that company, but it's all women, and they've just got a contract with P&O Cruises as well to look at this voluntourism component of a lot of the cruise ships stop in Milne Bay. So we're really excited about supporting Maletta to do that. And this is Barbara's passion.
And so we also want to involve young people. Pictured here is one of the women scientists. She is really the first woman in PNG who knows about the science of mangroves. And we will be looking at working with her to help us sort of make sure that what we have is sort of in line with the science, because the Nature Conservancy puts a lot of effort into ensuring that science supports the work we do on the ground.
And we're really taking our time, but also going fast in some ways. But we want our work to be a model across Papua New Guinea. So Barbara and I were just talking this evening before about how we're working in 2 provinces now, and then we're just working this plan to scale out to all these different provinces through our networks. The nice thing about this project is that everyone wants to be involved. We're not. We can't kind of handle the interest hardly. So that's a great problem to have. We've got really good support from the government as well. So they're asking us to help them kind of develop their mangrove policy, some of their climate policies, so that this work around gender is fully included. So we've got really good buy-in from the government as well. But we've got a plan and we need lots of help. So if anyone wants to give us advice or anything else, we're always open to it. And that's beautiful Papua New Guinea.
And so, as vulnerable as women are, they can be resilient, just like the mangroves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Well, every time we have a Perspectives Asia seminar, I'm always reminded that it is such a privilege to hear the people we hear, and tonight was no exception. So Robyn and Barbara, thank you so much for what has been a really inspiring story. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Caitlin Byrne. I'm the director of the Griffith Asia Institute, and as always, it's just a delight to be able to be here and to work with our good friends and colleagues at the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art. We do have some time, so I wonder if anyone has any questions to ask our 2 speakers tonight. We've got a roving mic, so we've got one straight here and followed by the gentleman. So if we have the microphone in that row, that would be great.
I go first? Okay. Just a quick question. Is there a great loss of mangroves within the Papua New Guinea area, and obviously there might be a need therefore to encourage more growth of that? And the second question to that was, how difficult is it to plant mangroves and get them to grow? Because obviously as a gardener, I'm happy to dig a hole in the ground and it might grow or it might not. I can water it. But when the darn thing's in water all the time, obviously it's used to it, but that must be difficult to get the darn thing growing.
Yes. So for the past 20 years, many organizations, not just the Nature Conservancy, have been doing a lot of mangrove planting out in the communities. The threats, like we said, just subsistence harvesting, local people cutting the mangroves to build their houses, that's the biggest threat. But now, more than ever, with the urban expansion, many of our mangroves are being cut down. And there is just like, people just treat them like swamp, wasteland. So they, there's inland people who move to the coastal areas, and then they become settlers, they cut the mangroves. In and around Port Moresby, you see a lot of that. So those are some of the threats that we have, yes. And we have tried to do mangrove planting time and time and again, but a few years back, we had a project, and I used to tell, the communities, our ancestors never planted mangroves. They let natural regeneration take place. It does take a long time, and often when we plant mangroves, there is no monitoring done, so they don't really survive. I think the survival rate is less than 50%.
So obviously you can't just sort of have a little nursery somewhere to get them sort of through the hard stages of their early life and then just replant them. It's natural regeneration. You have to...
That's the way to go. There are some projects that are being successful, but you need to continue to, motivate the women. So this idea around Mangoro Market Meri is about motivating them, adding that economic incentive so that they can continue to plant their mangroves, ensure there are rules and regulations for people to follow. So what we do is we also help the local communities to come up with management plans on what they can do, what they cannot do in looking after their environment.
Thank you.
So, I'll just add that I think PNG is one of the top mangrove countries in the world, so it's like 600,000 hectares to 900,000 hectares left of intact mangroves, like some of the healthiest in the world. And so it's we're really focusing on trying to help people stop totally clearing them in the first place, because it's really, really hard to replant. They're very sensitive, so there's 41 species or something in PNG alone, and they rely on zonation, so they're growing in different parts of the intertidal zone. And so if you just plant them, it's not going to work. And so we're really keen to help people stop clearing them in the first place. Yeah.
Hi. Just going back to one of the slides that you had there, one of the drawings that you'd had done, where it was talking about the awareness.
Do you want us to go back?
I guess it's the awareness of the importance for the mangroves. And I was astounded. Every person listening.
That one?
Was no.
The next one.
It's all men.
Yes.
There's one woman talking, but it's all men. So is that because the men are so utterly lacking and indifferent to the importance of... No, I'm just curious.
Yeah,
that was,
I love
as you said, Barbara said what she wanted drawn. And so she obviously asked for totally males sitting around the table with books and whatever else, and then the less formal one over there. So I'm just curious, is it really so much ignorance in terms of the behaviour of the men that threatens the mangroves so much? Because I was anticipating that your initial developing awareness of importance would have been the women as the first audience, and that they, with their basic information, would then share.
It's sort of interesting that you noticed that, because I noticed that as well when Ruth came with the pictures, and I said, oh, how come there's no women in the picture on the policy? And it's because there's no women at leadership level in the government. So if someone naturally is going to draw something, they're going to draw what they see. And so for me, it was really telling that the picture came back with no women in it. That people, women and men, aren't seeing women in government policy-making roles. And so we said to the artist, should we change this narrative by changing the picture? So we've changed the picture. So the picture in the awareness materials is now a mixture, even though that's not reality, it's the reality we want to see. So we've changed it, yeah. But it's really interesting that you saw that.
We might just come down here next and then up to the back.
Just in terms of economic development, I just wondered if there was much discussion with the women about the crab, if they're harvesting crab for selling at the market. Do they naturally select crab over a certain size, or is it? Do you spend any time talking about not harvesting the females, or looking at size to give them a chance to grow up, which in the long run then helps their own economic livelihood?
That's a really good point. So some of those things we are now addressing in the management plans. Yeah, previously they would just harvest, any sizes that are like something that can fetch them an income. But now that we are working with them to ensure that there are rules in place, they are putting the size, into the management plans. Yeah.
And we're trying to get the women, where this is our next phase, but trying to help them access sustainable seafood markets. So if they can prove that they're managing their mangroves well, that they're putting size limits, all sorts of the policy limits on the type of crabs and how many they get, that they can get a higher price. So we're looking at markets in Port Moresby, and then potentially in China and Hong Kong.
We've got
one up there.
I'm wondering how much support you are getting from the Australian government in your desires these days. And my reason for asking that is that 25 years ago I lived on an island which was of a pair of islands which must have been some years back, a century back, must have looked very similar. One was completely covered by mangrove, and the other that I lived on was half stripped, and they were still stripping mangroves when I was there. The islands I refer to are Daru and its sister island, Bristow. Now, the Australian government, in the early days, that Daru was one of the first places established, and it was up to my time there. They were still stripping mangroves under localisation. So I'm wondering what assistance you're getting from the Australian government. If not, why not?
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty good relationship with the Australian government, with the High Commission in Port Moresby, and they're supporting a lot of our work with women. So yeah, we have projects with them, and they are funding a number of this work in Milne Bay and Manus in particular. So yeah, I guess that's my answer.
We have, actually we've got one here, and then we might go to the back, and then we might need to bring to a close.
I have two questions. One, as a biological illustrator, I'm shocked that your artist is homeless, and is there anything that can be done to encourage his talent? He's extraordinary. And also, there was a huge dieback in Northern Australia of mangroves. Did this happen in Papua New Guinea too?
According to when we go out to the communities to do the surveys, it depends on natural disasters. Natural disasters cause a lot of dieback of mangroves, and maybe earthquakes. We are not quite sure how that happens, but people have told us that has happened. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We didn't get the large-scale dieback you're talking about a few years ago in northern Queensland that went largely it was just not in the media, which was surprising to me. But no, they didn't have that sort of large-scale dieback in PNG. And I don't know whether it's because there's more diversity of the species in PNG, and so there's more levels of tolerance. But we don't know why it didn't happen to the same degree. And then the homeless, we're doing what we can.
I'm organising a conference of US biological illustrators in Brisbane in the end of June, beginning of July. Is there any chance you could bring him down?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's not a bad outcome.
Yeah, there we go. This is worth everything. It's worth being nervous up here just to get someone.
We've got one last question up the back. Thank you.
Hi. So I guess my question is, I should probably state that I'm part Manus. Does this work include things like saksak and sago palm? And does that come into the scope of mangroves, or is that outside the scope of mangroves? So do sago palms kind of sit in the right zone?
Yes. When we talk about mangrove areas, we talk about, other plants that may be in the mangrove areas. But then again, it depends on the local people. We rely heavily on people in the communities to tell us what their needs are. Yeah. So if we are working in Manus, and if there is a need to, protect sago, maybe we can do that. We are seeing a lot of that kind of thing in Milne Bay right now. There's so much need out there for conservation. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess for us it's about. For me, I see it as also as building capacity of women's groups so they can do whatever is the most important thing for them to do. So it might be sago, it might be mangroves, whatever it is. We're helping them to build their capacity and access the skills and resources they need to do what they want to do. So, yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to deliver a vote of thanks to our fabulous speakers tonight. At the Griffith Asia Institute, we're really interested in understanding and engaging with nations of the Asia Pacific, understanding the experiences not just of nations but of communities and of people. And I think tonight we've had a really fabulous insight into the communities of our nearest neighbour. When you look at the world today, it can be a fairly scary place. And we deal quite a bit with the most pressing global issues, whether it's terrorism to climate change. It can be quite overwhelming. And in our region in particular, when we look at some of our neighbourhood, particularly the small islands of the South Pacific or Melanesia and the Pacific, we see some of the most vulnerable communities, the communities that are most exposed, in particular, to the threats of climate change, of a changing climate. And dealing with some of these issues is really quite an overwhelming task. Cynthia Enlow, who's a very famous feminist scholar, posed the question to a number of the international relations community a number of decades ago, in thinking about how we address some of our most pressing issues: where are all the women? And I was really delighted, Barbara, to hear you begin with that particular question, and to hear that the women are out in the mangroves, and that actually when we look to where the women are and where we look to what they're doing, we start to reveal the significance of local wisdom, traditional knowledge, the sorts of things that might actually help us address some of those very pressing challenges. So for me, the way that you took us through your journey actually was not about these awful challenges we're facing, but it was a really hopeful, inspirational story that gives us cause for optimism. The fact that you're also talking about how do we integrate what we know at the community level with some of the more contemporary solutions is also really important. So how we actually blend the way we respond to some of these real wicked problems will be critical to the way we go forward. So I just found thinking about the role of women as leaders in their communities, as leaders of sustainable livelihoods, is really important for us to do. And then to make sure that not only are we dealing with the issues of climate change, we're also dealing with issues of development and advancing women's economic empowerment at the same time. It's really fitting then tonight that we have in our audience not just members of our community, but also people who are here participating in the Pacific Arts Association, and also people who have contributed to the Women's Wealth Project that's been part of the exhibit out in the gallery today. And I understand that the Women's Wealth Project will be on display. It will be in the gallery for a little bit longer than the APT exhibition more broadly. So that's really something to look forward to and to come back and to visit. So thank you both very much for sharing your story so openly, so honestly. I think there were lessons in there. You know, it was really good to hear your lessons that can be shared with our communities right across Northern Australia, Queensland, and across the Pacific region. Where the local can become global is really exciting, and you presented us with a global model that I hope we can help you take forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a round of applause to our speakers.